to their longest tenured player and someone who owner Steve Cohen referred to as a member of their Fab Four. SNY MLB insider Andy Martino reporting that the Mets are sending Brandon Nimmo to the Texas Rangers in return for infielder Marcus Semien. Nimmo has spent his entire 10-year MLB career with the Mets, who drafted him 13th overall in 2011 out of high school in Wyoming. So in return, the Amazons get Semien, a 3-time All-Star, 2-time Gold Glove winner, including last year at second base. The 35-year-old hit at least 20 homers all 5 full seasons from 2019 to 2024, but hit just 15 in 127 games last year. He is also he's reported deal $26 million each of the next 2 seasons and then $20 million in 2028, while Nimmo has a deal $20.5 million every year through 2030. We are now joined by SNY MLB insider Andy Martino, who confirms this story. And Andy, let's just, as you mentioned and reported last week, Brandon Nimmo was on the block. How did this deal with Texas go down?
Well, it was kind of an old-fashioned baseball trade in that way with Texas, in a sense that it was need for need. The Mets, as David Stearns has been very clear publicly, have been looking to improve their defense. And the Rangers, from their end, have been looking for a different offensive approach. So it matches up there in that sense. And, more broadly for the Mets, it gives them a chance to improve their defense really at 2 positions, because Semien, although off his peak as a hitter, is still an elite defensive second baseman. And that's what really excites the Mets, even though there is still upside in that bat, not just from the Mets perspective, but I've talked to some Texas-based people who think Semien has a couple solid years left in him as a hitter. But this is really about what he does for you at second base. And then defensively, if you look at the outfield, prior to this trade, the Mets had Juan Soto and Brandon Nimmo locked into the corner outfield positions for years to come, and neither is an elite defender at those positions. So now they have the flexibility at one of the corners, either to go internal with one of their young athletic players like Carson Bench or Jet Williams into the outfield mix sooner than later, or perhaps if things break a certain way in the offseason, they could look at a Cody Bellinger for immediate impact in the outfield. But really, Bellinger or not, this was about moving on from that Nimmo contract and improving the defense for this coming season.
You led me to my next question, because obviously this news is not a surprise after the rumors that were out there less than a week ago. But he was a mainstay here with the Mets that they committed to financially just a few years ago. So what sort of happened other than just sort of Juan Soto arriving that made Brandon Nimmo, quote unquote, expendable for the Mets?
He was a tough player to trade. I would almost think that if Met people were able to speak publicly about this, and they can't because this trade isn't official yet, but expendable would probably be too strong a word for them in a way. Like, it breaks their hearts to trade Brandon Nimmo in a lot of ways. Somebody who really has deep relationships at every level of the organization. And going back to Sandy Alderson's very first draft, you want to talk about a mainstay. But it's really just a baseball decision where you have an aging player who's only, as is the case with the rest of us in our lives, is only going to age in one direction. And for his particular job with Nimmo, he's just that contract is just really long. As you said, through 2030, and Semien's only a 3-year contract. So it just made sense from a shorter commitment and better defense next year. But it hurts them to lose Nimmo as a person.
As you mentioned, this helps the team immensely defensively. He's still coming off a Gold Glove season, but his offensive numbers, Marcus Semien, I'm just referring here to, have dropped off. So they're willing to take that drop off in offense. But Nimmo, even though he might have declined in the outfield, was still providing some pop and with the home run. So how do you think they will, fill that offensive role that they might be losing in the run production with Nimmo?
It's so early in the offseason, and there's so many moving parts, Eamon, that right now, the Mets, I can tell you for a fact, they don't have a specific plan. Like, this domino fell, so we're signing this guy because Nimmo's gone. It's not like that. It's like, over the course of this offseason, there'll be enough moving around with a roster where they think they'll be in a good place offensively by spring training. Again, whether they take a big swing at a Bellinger, whether they bring Pete Alonso back, whether they do something that we don't foresee at this point. They think they have a lot of time to shore up that offense. And again, it's just about defense being such a core value for Stearns that they saw an opportunity to get defensively better and didn't need an exact blueprint to how you replace Nimmo's bat in the lineup. That's not what this was about. It wasn't the first domino in a whole plan set of moves. It was just the first domino in an offseason that could take them in a lot of different directions.
Yes, no doubt. We are anticipating a busy offseason, and as you just said, this is the first domino to fall. Andy Martino, thanks for joining us here on SNY. And as we mentioned, Nimmo has been a constant for this franchise over the last decade, playing over 1,000 games while also scoring the 6th most runs in franchise history. He signed an 8-year extension after the 2022 season and said, quote, "It feels good to put this jersey back on, and no, it's not coming off." He also had a full no-trade clause, which he waived to complete this trade. We are now joined by the voice of the Mets here on SNY, Gary Cohen. And Gary, we'll get to the baseball side of this deal in just a second, but obviously you're around this club every day, and for Brandon Nimmo, that means a decade. Sort of how surprised is not the word, but sort of what's your feeling to know that Brandon Nimmo is no longer a Met?
Well, it's always hard to get rid of the guys that you've known from the time that they first signed their contract. I mean, I remember meeting Brandon as an 18-year-old back when he was drafted out of Wyoming in 2011. And he was a delightful presence. There's no question that his personality will be missed above all else. He spent 15 years in this organization, the last 10 at the big league level. As you mentioned, he's the longest tenured Met. And now he is no longer. Now he gets reunited with Jacob deGrom in Texas. And it's a sad day from that standpoint. It's a very interesting day from a baseball standpoint, as Andy was pointing out, because there are so many threads to what this means for the Mets going forward. But it's sad to see somebody who was so well liked and so well respected and never faltered in that for 15 years, leave the organization. He is a special Met. He will always be one of the most gentlemanly ball players that has ever come through here. So from that standpoint, he will definitely be missed.
Just one more along those lines. As we've discussed many times, chemistry on a baseball team is fleeting. The roster is always different from year to year, so it's never the same. But how do you think not having Brandon Nimmo in that clubhouse could affect this team's chemistry?
Well, as you say, every year it's different. I remember after 2024 with such a special group, everybody in that clubhouse basically said the same thing. It would be great to roll it back again, but that's just not realistic. Every year is different. And the clubhouse changed from 24 to 25, and it'll change from 25 to 26. I will also add that everything I've ever heard about Marcus Semien tells me that he's going to be a breath of fresh air in that clubhouse because he is a very well-regarded person in his own right. So that certainly, will change the nature of things just by his presence rather than Brandon's. But I think that you try and bring in high character people, and the Mets have traded one, and they're bringing back another one.
So let's now focus on Marcus Semien. How do you think his presence, and especially his glove, I guess, improves the Mets in 2026 and beyond?
Well, he won a Gold Glove at age 34, so that's pretty impressive. He just turned 35. So, he's a little more than 2 years older than Brandon, but he seems to have aged defensively better. Brandon did not have a good year in the outfield last year. This gives the Mets more flexibility. You take away 5 years of Nimmo and you bring back 3 years of Semien, and again, Marcus is a couple of years older. But at least defensively, the aging curve seems not to have hit him as hard. Now, offensively, how it impacts the Mets is going to be fascinating because the last couple of years have not been kind to Marcus. He played through a very difficult foot injury last year, but it also does something else. The Mets have been trying to get more right-handed, and they do that with this trade, and that has impacts beyond just bringing in your everyday second baseman. It affects Mark Vientos' status on this team because he was valued as a right-handed bat. It obviously affects Jeff McNeil's status on this team because he's the incumbent second baseman, although he does have positional flexibility. But, what this does more than anything else is it opens up left field, and that presents a whole plethora of possibilities, whether that means a Carson Bench or a Jet Williams, either from opening day or eventually, or the possibility of signing a Kyle Tucker or a Cody Bellinger at the top of the free agent market. So, as Andy said, it's only the first domino to fall, but there are so many impacts beyond this that will give David Stearns a little more flexibility as he moves forward, as it improves the Mets defense.
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see what this leads to. And, of course, it will be a busy offseason. Gary Cohen, thanks for hopping on here for the coverage of the breaking news with the Mets trading Brandon Nimmo. Now,
Thanks.
from one person who's around the team every day to another, Steve Gelbs joins us. And, Steve, Brandon Nimmo's the longest tenured Met. He's been here since 2015. You've covered his entire career. Give us a sense what it's going to be like for you to walk into that clubhouse at Port St. Lucie and Citi Field and not see Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah, it's going to be very bizarre, Eamon, and I've texted a little bit back and forth with Brandon, just thanking him for everything over the years, and he's one of those rare, not just rare athletes, but rare people. Just as good a person as I've ever been around in my life. So happy, so joyous, and for me, the two things that will always stand out about Brandon are, one, you see a lot of guys enter the league with a lot of optimism and joy, and then as the years go on, maybe they get a little jaded and things happen and they change. And Brandon is the exact same guy now that he was when he first came into the league. So that in and of itself is a rarity in sports. The second thing, though, is I think we sometimes forget the level of work that Brandon had to put in to squeeze out every possible ounce of talent that was in that body. Brandon Nimmo, every year, I would joke with him every spring, okay, what's it this year? What are we working on this year? What did we spend the offseason improving? He would always pick a weakness, and he would just work his tail off to get better at it, whether that was hitting lefties, whether that was improving his defense enough in center field to be re-signed as a center fielder, and be able to play everyday center field at one point. Whatever it was, he just really was one of those old-fashioned throwback grinders. And he was drafted as someone that was raw, didn't have any high school baseball in Wyoming when he was drafted a spot ahead of Jose Fernandez, and that was something that stuck with him for a while, as he took a long time to get to the majors compared to Fernandez, and certainly to peak the way we've seen him over the last number of years. But I always respected the way that he worked, and so it's going to be really strange not having him around. And listen, he is somebody that I will always be rooting for wherever he goes. Now it's Texas, but wherever he goes in the future.
One more along those lines. He clearly was a leader on this team. I know there had been there had been some conversations last spring about making a captain for the Mets, but I guess they didn't need one. But certainly he was a spokesperson and a leader. So how do you think his absence will impact the clubhouse?
I think, and Gary spoke about this as well, it will be an absence, but everything that you hear when you speak to people around the league is that the Mets are certainly losing a great person and leader, but they're gaining one as well in Marcus Semien. So, sometimes, you never know every year how the mix is going to be in a clubhouse, and Brandon was one of the great, like I said, great people, great leaders, but sometimes this core has been around and been together for a long time, and sometimes it needs to be shaken up. I don't think Brandon, his personality or his play needed to be subtracted, but sometimes it's good to just change up the mix. And again, you're bringing in someone who is very well regarded in Marcus Semien. So, yes, you will miss Brandon Nimmo in that clubhouse, but it is not as if they subtracted Nimmo and brought in somebody who has the opposite reputation. They brought in somebody who has an equally sterling reputation for that, and hopefully that contributes in a positive way to the 2026 Mets.
All right, we'll see how that turns out for the Mets. And Steve Gelbs, thanks for joining us here on SNY. As again, breaking news, the Mets have traded Brandon Nimmo to the Texas Rangers for Gold Glove second baseman Marcus Semien. And now, for more on that, we welcome in Todd Zeile. And Todd, I want to start on from a pure baseball sense with you on this one. How do you think the Mets got better after making this move for Semien?
I think that remains to be seen. I'm not quite positive yet that they have gotten better. I think Marcus Semien is a very, very good player, but you're also getting a guy that's 35 years old, has a couple of years left on his contract, is Gold Glove caliber, was a Gold Glove winner last year, but his offensive numbers dipped a little bit. But I think as far as you looking at it from a holistic standpoint, you've got a guy that can play a very, very good quality second base. He could fill that spot there. I know run prevention and especially defense up the middle is something that this Mets team has been looking to improve upon. But at the same time, this is not a lock that he's going to be that same productive guy. You don't see a lot of guys getting moved at 35 plus years of age. So I think it remains to be seen. I do think that it's an absence to not have Brandon Nimmo in that locker room, but I also think that his willingness to move that no trade clause and take this trade tells me that there's something maybe even beneath the surface, under the radar, about that clubhouse that maybe he knows better than we know, Heyman.
Todd, you led me to my next question because obviously you had a long tenured career, but with many different teams. So getting traded, I'm sure was, it's part of life in the major leagues. I was a little surprised, that I thought he'd be tougher to move because of the no trade. But, as you mentioned, maybe he figured if they didn't want me here, well, I don't want to be at a place where I'm not wanted. But as someone who knows Brandon Nimmo well, were you a little surprised that he ultimately waived the no trade clause?
Yeah, I was, Eamon. And I think the reason that I was surprised is because if you get to this point in your career, you've never put the World Series ring on, you want to make sure that you're going to giving yourself the best opportunity to do that. I think that anybody around baseball over the last 4 or 5 years recognizes that with Steve Cohen at the helm and David Stearns as the president, this team is not going to take anything less than postseason and winning opportunities and going to do everything they can to make those happen. So as a player, maybe sacrificing a little bit of that possibility to win when you have the ability to block any trade was a little bit surprising. But I think, it goes to what I was saying initially, Eamon, and that is that I think this clubhouse was a bit of a mystery. I think Brandon is a guy that has always been an upfront voice of the clubhouse, a voice of reason, a solid guy, a homegrown guy that brings a kind of perspective in that clubhouse. And you just got to wonder if there's something in that mix that made him feel like he had a better chance somewhere else. If that's the case, then I think the Mets are looking at other issues and other holes that they're going to have to fill to fulfill what they've set out to do, and that's to win a championship.
Yeah, that chemistry in the clubhouse has definitely been something people have whispered even loudly about the last 2 or 3 years. But, now as we sit back and analyze what's next, as Gary mentioned, there's a thread coming up here. Todd, you sit back, the Mets needs, what's out there. What do you think this now opens up for David Stearns' next possible move or priority?
Well, that's a great question. And I think, initially just reacting to it, I had heard some, of the rumors about Brandon, and I just figured it wasn't going to happen because of the things that I just mentioned. This tells me that there's, maybe some other underlying things that have to be addressed. And I think some of that is that glue, that heart, that sort of pulse of the Mets that I think was missing last season, I think has shown up and gone away over the last 3 or 4 seasons. So maybe there's going to be a look to try to fill that void. And we can talk about the Jose Iglesias of the world or Max Scherzers of the world. I think Jesse Winker was a guy that was made to fill that role last year with all the injuries. He wasn't able to be that glue. So I think that's one issue. But I think secondarily, this opens the possibility to go try and get good defensively in center field and maybe have an option left field. It could be, is it Cody Bellinger, a guy that's on the list, or is Kyle Tucker a guy that's on the list? I think there, you open that possibility for David Stearns to go look to fill this with some guys that you wondered if they brought him over, how they were going to make it work with Brandon in left and Soto in right.
All right, so this is his first chess move for David Stearns this offseason. Now we sit back and wait and see what's next. Todd Zeile, as always, thanks for hopping on for our breaking news coverage of Brandon Nimmo being traded. So now from the ball field in the studio to the front office point of view, we welcome in Jim Duquette. And Jim, what sort of flexibility does this now give the Mets payroll-wise?
Well, I think when you look at it on the long term, I mean, they're saving almost $30 million, right, over the length of the contract. Brandon's contract was going to be up in 5 years, so I think freeing that up certainly helps. You're not necessarily worried as much with Steve Cohen as the owner about the dollars, but it does give you the flexibility when you're talking about the declining years. And Brandon is certainly started to look at his on base percentage. He was starting to decline a little bit over the last couple, even though he's over 350 on base percentage in his career as a Met. So I think that you kind of keep that in mind. You saw maybe a little different step backwards on the defensive side as well. So I think all of those come into play when you're trying to make a deal like this. They also didn't have a lot of flexibility. If you're going to try to change the roster around a little bit, there are a lot of guys that you don't have the ability to move, right? And so Brandon was the one that still had plenty of value out there in the marketplace. As you could see, Texas was looking for some offense and a really good idea of the strike zone. So I think all of those kind of play. There's almost like a perfect storm. Semien's defense has already been talked about. It's a significant upgrade at second base. And I think captures what they're trying to do, certainly in the middle infield. So I think that flexibility financially, the flexibility of the roster, I think those are all things you look at as a general manager, knowing that this is the first move of many this winter.
As we heard Andy say, this was not an easy move for the Mets to make. Certainly, it's not probably going to be a popular move because Brandon Nimmo is such a popular player here in New York. But to also trade someone who's producing offensively to get better defensively, how tough a move do you think that was for David Stearns to pull the trigger on?
So I've heard him talk a lot about this run prevention, and it was definitely real. Like this past year, they were below average defensively in 4 positions on the field, so they had to get better here, and this really helps them at that position. Certainly helps them in the ability to do it in left field as well or right field. By the way, I'm just speculating, but they could move Juan Soto, who's played he's played over 400 games. They could move him to left field if they had a significant upgrade on the right field side. I'm not necessarily saying that's what's going to happen here, but that does give them some flexibility in that regard. But, I think with all of that, you have to be awfully careful when you're moving around these parts, bringing in guys who cannot handle New York. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. Right now, Semien's a guy who's been in the league a long time. He's a guy that has only been in the American League, though, so there will be a little bit of a transition there. He was dealing with some injuries from last year, too. So, it's not that easy to go from, even though you see a lot of interleague now going from the American League to the National League just historically. So there are some things there early on. It's quite the different personality. Semien's a little quieter than Brandon. Brandon was always accessible and a go-to guy. But that kind of at the addition and subtraction. So the addition of defense, but the subtraction of the offense for me is going to be, where is the line right now? How much more are they going to subtract on the offensive side to really upgrade on the defensive side? Because they got to have both. You got to have a good offensive balance, and a good defensive balance. And they were out of whack when you look at that offense and defense from last year.
All right, Jim, let's focus on that line now. And you're going to be the first one. I've wanted to ask everyone this question, but you're going to get it. So let's read the tea leaves. If they improve defensively at second and maybe in the outfield, does that mean they can settle for more offense and less defense at first base and one Pete Alonso? How does this move, you think, impact the Alonso sweepstakes for the Mets?
So I don't subscribe to the opinion that Pete was a big subtraction at first base. Defensively, if you look around the game, he was maybe below average when you look at some of the metrics. And there are some other ones where he's the way he was picking any throws that were in the dirt. To me, he was one of the best. So, you can get by with a guy like that over there at first base, certainly, if you're going to improve and be above average at third, which would mean that I think Brett Beatty would have the inside track. Lindor has to pick up, his defense at shortstop. It took a little bit of a step backwards. Semien, as we just talked about, that would be a solid infield there, if they signed Pete. And then, the configuration in the outfield, you got to look at a plus defender in center field. Soto's going to have to get better, whether he's in right and left, and then the next outfielder. So I do think there's a spot for Pete for sure. Obviously you can rotate in that DH spot, but the guys that I think are more in jeopardy would be I think we're just talked about there, whether it was McNeil, it was Vientos, that group of players. You start to wonder, where the playing time is going to be next year, as you start to see some of these these moves by David Stearns.
Yep, and we will continue to wait for them on the rest of this offseason. Jim Duquette, thanks for joining us here on SNY and our breaking news coverage of Brandon Nimmo being traded. And now it's going to get a little bit louder as we say salutations and welcome in Sal Licata. And Sal, I know from doing this show with you, what do we talk back now, 30 years? But you're not often an emotional guy. You're not big into the homegrown thing and, the Pete Alonso home run record-breaking thing with the Mets. But still, this was the longest tenured Met, a very popular Met. What was your immediate reaction when you learned that Brandon Nimmo was no longer on your team?
Yeah, my immediate reaction was, this is a great trade to make the baseball team better. I could say the same thing that everybody else said, and I had the chance to interview Nimmo for my radio show before the season, got to know him a little bit. I think he's a great guy. So it's obviously sad to see a long-tenured Met go, but what are we, in the business of being friends here, or are you trying to build a better baseball club? This makes the Mets better. It's as simple as that. Anybody who's not looking at this trade in that manner is playing checkers and not chess. The Mets needed a big move like this, clear one of those guys out from that core to make them better, make them more flexible to make big moves. It's not about Nimmo's offensive numbers versus Semien's offensive numbers. It's about getting rid of a player who was becoming a liability in left field, who was inconsistent offensively, unreliable at times with Nimmo. I know he's a great character, all those things, but he just wasn't Semien's a better baseball player, bottom line. Semien's a better baseball player, and he fits the Mets better. So don't look at the offensive numbers. Look at who's a better baseball player, who is a better fit, and now what the Mets could do moving forward without Brandon Nimmo clogging up left field.
We're still friends, though, right, Sal? It's not about friends, but you and I are still friends, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go back because Todd Zeile discussed that maybe there's something, underneath the surface here about the chemistry, something we've discussed about this team over the years. Why do you think we reached a point here where David Stearns probably said, okay, it's time to break up this core?
I don't think it's a bad chemistry thing, certainly when it pertains to Brandon Nimmo. He was the true captain of this team, certainly one of the leaders of this team. I just think it comes down to flexibility. In my mind, Eamon, you couldn't have a world where both Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso are still on the Mets next year and they're better defensively. And if I see that, I would imagine David Stearns also saw that. Which bat would you want to invest in, Nimmo or Alonso? Okay, clearly it's Pete Alonso, so if that's going to be the case and you want to have him play some DH, well, what does Nimmo project as? A left fielder who's not a good defensive player, who's going to need some time at DH, especially to stay healthy. So it's an obvious one to me that this also means it's more likely Pete Alonso comes back. I don't think this had anything to do. Now, I don't know. I'm not in that clubhouse. I know some things, but I don't know about that. I would think that when you trade Nimmo, a high character guy, that's not about a clubhouse thing. I think that's more of a baseball move on the field. And I'd love to see somebody tell me how this doesn't make the Mets better, opening things up. Obviously, many more moves to come, but they needed a big move like this to get their offseason started.
All right, as you mentioned, many more moves to come. The other guys we've had on have kind of alluded to it. This would make one to think that they're also looking to move McNeil and Vientos because they don't have spots for them. How easy do you think it will be to move those two guys?
Look, Eamon, we actually talked about this a week ago last Sunday, and you asked me, who do I think is more likely to be back next year, Nimmo or Alonso? And I said it was Alonso. And everybody would say, well, it's unlikely. He's got the no trade. He's making a lot of money. When the Mets traded Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander away, that shocked the world. So I'm not shocked by the Nimmo deal. I would certainly not be shocked by McNeil or Vientos. And I wouldn't just, look, McNeil coming back as a bench player is not the worst thing in the world. I would have moved on from him, but I don't need him to start second base. And now the Mets don't need that either. He could be a versatile piece, a useful piece off the bench. If not, they move him. Same thing with Vientos. Vientos could be maybe a bat off the bench, maybe a right-handed bat, platoon at DH. But again, they can move on from him and maybe be better off. This was the first of what I would expect to be many in overhauling a team that has not been good enough since 2022, but specifically last year, winning just 83 games, missing the playoffs.
The first move of many, and obviously it's going to be a completely looking different roster for the Mets in 2026. Sal Licata, thanks for joining us here on SNY. And that's going to do it for our coverage of breaking news of Brandon Nimmo being traded to the Texas Rangers for Marcus Semien. We'll have much more coming up, of course, on Sports Night at 11. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.